Welcome to the May 2021 Patreon-supported Q&A. These questions all come from awesome Patreon supporters because this is a completely viewer-supported channel. We have no advertising money coming in from YouTube or anywhere else. We have no corporate masters, no sponsors, no overlords. Completely demonetized, proactively, completely sponsored by you, the viewer, who keep InRange alive. And at the $5 level and above, you can submit a question to the Q&A every month, and hopefully I'll get to it. If I did not get to yours and you want to ask it again, just let me know by saying second time, third time asking, of which there's a number of in here, and I will try to get them at some point. But thank you for keeping InRange alive. You will notice that I'm sitting in the shade. This is being filmed in late May here in the Sonoran Desert, and it's at the point where if that giant ball in the sky starts touching you with its rays, there's a chance you won't survive the Q&A. So I am in the shade, and I already have a hat in preparation just in case, and hoping that we get through this, which usually takes an hour or more, before that thing gets to me. We can watch it move, and we'll see how that works out. So let me just get to the questions right off the bat. Tyler A. Is a 22 LR conversion kit a good way to train with a full-size rifle, like an AR? You know, I haven't had good success with any of those. I've tried a number of them. I've tried a couple of them in ARs, for example, and my results have been, yeah, it fires, but the accuracy wasn't what I would like it to be. And I would honestly say that if your goal is to train for marksmanship, you're bedded with a dedicated 22 LR that's meant for that. And getting all your wind calls, positional stuff down, all the things that come with positional shooting and marksmanship, rather than just converting a full-size rifle. Now, you can convert it for plinking, you can certainly convert it for some practice, but in reality, I don't find that they function really equivalently, nor in recoil, of course, to the standard cartridge. And I think they're kind of a gee whiz thing more than a useful thing, personally. Yeah, your mileage may vary. Craig S. How bad, in quotes, are VOMZ optics, V-O-M-Z? Craig, I've only had one experience with VOMZ optics, and it's their 3.5x sort of PU looking like piece of glass. It's essentially very equivalent to the PU in function in terms of reticle as well, and pretty low cost for what it was. And I put it for a while on my FG42, and it worked fine. I was really surprised, quite honestly, because that gun is a little bit of a beast and has recoil, and I would have thought that it would have killed it, and it did not. So my sample of one VOMZ optic, which was that specific unit, was that I would say I was impressed and thought that it was okay. So I can't answer for all of them, but I can say that that one was fine. Andrew H. Would you rather have a 1911 or 1917 U.S. revolver to defend yourself with? Oh, that's easy. 1911. Semi-automatic, magazine fed. Once the 1911 came around, well, revolvers are cool, and I definitely love them. There's not a lot of arguments for them. There are some arguments for revolvers, which are different topics for a different day. But if you gave me the choice between a 1911 and a 1917 revolver, I would absolutely take the 1911. KD Campbell. I got nothing. Just want to say thanks for all the great content. Wow. Not even a question. Just a statement. And a very kind one at that. Thank you very much, KD. Thank you for the support. Augustin D. Short version. Can there be gun legislation that makes both sides happy if logic is put to the task? No. Matthew J. If you were going to be airdropped into a desert island with nothing that you couldn't grab in your house within a 10-minute notice, what would you be bringing? Every possible container filled with water that I could, and a fresh water filter system. So fresh water and a water filtration system. If I had more time, I'd bring a knife. If I had more time than that, I'd bring a knife and an axe. But that would be it. I mean, 10 minutes isn't a lot of time. So first emphasis, fresh water. Maybe the water filtration system would be first because you're on a desert island, but salination's an issue. At any rate, fresh water, a water purification system, and a knife. RGB. Is field bullet casting and reloading of black powder cartridges a viable way to simplify resupply? Yes and no. Obviously, you need the lead. So if you're going to cast bullets, you need lead to cast the bullets. And if you're going to carry the weight of lead, you might as well carry pre-cast bullets. But reloading of black powder cartridges in the field is something that is viable, was done in the, quote, Old West, even by the military. There are reloading component kits for the military and the supply clerk to be able to remanufacture, for example, 4570 in the field. So it's absolutely a viable way to at least continue resupply. I don't know that it simplifies it, but it certainly makes it possible for you to continue to have ammunition, hopefully, as long as you've got components, because the supply chain back then was unreliable. Tim K. Have you ever been to Custer's Last Stand, also known as, by the way, I'm adding this, the Battle of the Greasy Grass, and would you ever do a deep dive into that battle? I have not been there, and it's definitely on my checklist of things to do and places to be. So will I ever go there? Yes, it's absolutely on the agenda. And will I ever do a deep dive into the battle? Yes, although I think my deep dive on that will be specific firefights in the battle with a precursory discussion about how they got in that situation in the first place. Probably not the entire battle. That's been done ad nauseum and for good reasons, but it's probably hard to add more to that conversation than that. But I think putting an emphasis on specific events that happened within the affair would have a lot of value and something that a lot of people haven't seen. So that is a goal. I definitely want to get there. It's very high on my list of things I want to do and just haven't yet. Travis R. Mare's leg. ... Why? Okay, for those of you that don't know, a mare's leg is a lever action rifle, usually a 30-30 or something, but different ones. But the point is they cut the stock down till it's a pistol by modern information, and it sometimes has an extended lever. So it's a short, very short lever action with essentially no stock. And the answer to why on that is Hollywood. It was something that I think was done in a few movies, if not a bunch of old West Westerns, because it looked cool. It has almost no practical application. If you've ever actually used a mare's leg, I know there'll be people in the audience who go, I use them and I hit stuff no problem. Good for you. Do it on the clock and do it in an environment with stress in unusual firing situations, and you'll find the mare's leg becomes pretty garbage real fast. So, Hollywood, and looks cool. G3 Yost, what is your favorite sandwich topping? Miracle Whip, easily. Better than mayonnaise. And, yeah, Miracle Whip. Where did you get your black full rim brim hat? You mean like this one? I would like to purchase one. The answer to that, and almost the answer to every piece of Old West clothing that I wear on the show, is Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone, for all its weirdness, benefits, detriments, has Allen Street is coated with a couple stores at least that sell reproduction, historical clothing, gear, accessories for people who want to dress up while they're in Tombstone, or for reenactors, or just people who love the Old West. And it is a fantastic place if you want to get your Old West like clothing on. So vests, hats, boots, shirts, number of stores on Allen Street. And that's my answer to almost every piece of Old West clothing that I wear. Garrett D. From a cowboy action shooting perspective, how do you feel about Marlin being under Ruger ownership? Do you expect them to be competitive with other lever actions on the market, such as Henry? Well, it's interesting you mentioned this. I'm going to answer the question based on the perspective you put around it, which is from a cowboy shooting perspective. I don't think Marlin being owned by Ruger matters at all. Marlins are used in cowboy action shooting, but not a lot. They are the minority lever action present at events. And do I expect them to be competitive with other lever actions on the market, such as Henry? Henry, and I mean when I say not the Henry style rifle, but you mean Henry USA, the manufacturer of Henry style rifles here in the States, isn't present at cowboy action at all. Have I ever seen a Henry USA lever action at a cowboy match? I have not. I've seen Marlins, but I've never seen a Henry USA lever action at a cowboy action match. They use different dimensional parts than the other predominant Italian replicas on the market, like Uberte, as well as they cost a heck of a lot more. And frankly, while fit and finish is better, from a performance perspective, they don't provide anything that the Ubertes don't, besides better quality control right out of the box. But in regards to seeing actual Henrys at a cowboy action match, never seen one. Timothy C. Why did the video of you shooting M855 and M855A1 against Russian level 4 body armor plates become private and unviewable? It's because there's a mistake in the video. In the video, we mentioned that the penetrator is tungsten. It is not. And I didn't want to leave up erroneous information, so I took it down. I might try to edit it or something, but I haven't yet. Gunner D. With your recent Fallout theme collaboration, I have to ask, what faction in the Fallout series would you align with, or wish to join or help, or would you go at it alone? You can't go at it alone. That's an interesting thing. When it comes to these concepts of apocalyptic scenarios and things like Fallout, the lone survivor trope is always something really popular, especially amongst a lot of gun people. And I get it. It's compelling. The whole, like, I'll do this on my own thing. The reality is, people that survive bad situations survive them because of community and very rarely based on their own singular skills. So going at it alone is probably a surefire way to die. So in regards to that, you're going to see this in the video of the match, because there will be a Fallout themed match coming out as well, a video. And in it, I portray a follower of the Apocalypse member. They essentially travel the waste, are not adherents of either Caesar's Legion or the NCR, and they provide medical support, community aid, etc., in a somewhat decentralized fashion. So if I had to pick one, it would be followers of the Apocalypse. Charles E. What's your favorite way to enjoy eggs? Over medium, if I have to fry them. But actually my favorite way that wasn't the right answer. I gave you an answer of how I like them prepared when I fry them. I like them soft boiled. I like to put them in a little thing, crack them open, some salt on them, and eat them while they're still gooey. A very Norwegian or Scandinavian thing. Absolutely over medium if fried, but my favorite way to enjoy them is soft boiled. And we've got a helicopter incursion. I'll pause for a moment. Okay, let's keep going. Owen S. Third or fourth time asking, when reading history, what are some common misconceptions historians have about firearms that tend to bother you the most or stick out as the most prevalent? My gosh, there's so many. Like, what part of history are we talking about? Obviously, the failures around the AR-15 and the early M16 are prevalent and irritating. Honestly, so many of the gun tropes we've crushed, or gun myths we've absolutely destroyed here on this channel, are common misconceptions that you see from historians when reading about firearms. So the AR-15, the unstoppable AKM, those are both common in a lot of history, but it depends on what period of history you're talking about. If you're talking about Old West history, the idea might be that everyone has a single action army, a Colt, which is absolutely false. The Colt single action armies existed, but the kind and variety of pistols carried on the frontier were wide and different, and certainly not all of them were single action armies. I guess I'll go with a philosophical one, which is that having the gun solves the problem, or is somehow a force multiplier that sometimes it isn't. And that's a video I want to talk about if I would like to do a video focusing more on the 1811 Slave Revolt in New Orleans, or near New Orleans. And they were able to acquire a relatively small number, but a small number of arms. And the reality is that back then, for example, the force multiplier of a gun in your hand then as a muzzle-loading smoothbore was really only a force multiplier when you used them in very disciplined, trained divisions or groups that learned how to do loading sequences and combine the power of everyone together in a very disciplined training scenario. And that the individual gun carried by an individual person back then is arguably not that great and maybe worse than just a cane knife. So those are a few examples, but there's so many it'd be hard to get. I could go on that question for forever, really. Max J. What do you think prompted your interest in firearms as a force equalizer and defensive tool? Well, a number of things. Honestly, I'm not going to go too deep into this one because it's kind of on the personal side, but historically speaking, I think you can see that there is a reality to that, especially when you look at the topic of the struggle, ongoing and ever-present struggle for civil rights, and how firearms have played into that, even though they've been left out of the narrative. The reality is they've played into that, and that's one very distinctive example. In my younger years, however, I was in a situation that wasn't great, and had some family that wasn't great. And I remember as a kid that instead of being afraid of a gun that was sometimes inappropriately leveraged, the reality was I thought to myself, wow, if someone has something like that, maybe everyone should have them, because then it equalizes it. It goes down that far. Instead of, like, a lot of people, when they have a bad experience around guns, they'll have this impression, this thought of, wow, those should be banned. And mine was the opposite, which was, wow, I should have one too. Um, Also, when living in a somewhat not great neighborhood in my younger years, which was socially, economically challenged, to use that phrase, having a gun was important more than once. And I can speak to the statement that the having one sometimes and being able to brandish, I'm going to use that word, can sometimes frequently change a situation, and you, luckily in my case, didn't have to pull the trigger. So, didn't want to go too deep on that, but those are my base level answers. Vox. Outside of competition, do you see any practical use for a semi-automatic pistol caliber carbine that isn't already covered by an intermediate rifle caliber short rifle? So essentially a PCC versus a compact AR. Well, for some people, they're more comfortable with them. There's generally, if done right, there's generally less recoil, less boom and flash, or Sturm und Drang. And so if someone wanted to keep a PCC for self-defense and they weren't going to want to deal with the fact that their ears would get absolutely blown out and destroyed if they fired a short-barreled 5.56 versus a short-barreled 9mm, that's one example. And certainly the accuracy requirements of a semi-auto PCC in those environments is more than sufficient, and absolutely more accurate and easier to use than, say, a pistol. So there's one example. Other than that, I can't think of anything. They're fun, and ammunition compatibility with your pistol, perhaps. But no, not really. But I'm sure there's others that just don't come to mind. Herc. Third time asking. Broadly speaking, who would enforce your proposed digital Bill of Rights, and who would it be enforced upon? Well, this is a big concept, and my concept of a digital Bill of Rights was based along the lines that here in the U.S., at least, we have this, at least we tip our hat to the idea that we have a Bill of Rights, and in that is included, for example, the First Amendment and the right to free speech. And now, all rights have limits, and that's not 100% meaning you can say or do anything anywhere. But in general, the acknowledgement is that a person has the right to speak their opinion, and as long as those opinions aren't implicitly calling for violence upon others or something like that, it's legally protected free speech. So what's interesting to me is when you get into what is now the real public square of this world. Not the public square used to be the public square. You go stand on a soapbox and yell in a corner. But we don't have that. We now have the internet, and social media has usurped much of the internet to be the place where the conversation's had. And social media now controls much of what is allowed to be said or not said in that environment, and therefore they have the ability to change the narrative. And so my thought has been, if the Bill of Rights, granted they're not even well protected in meat space, MEAT, but if the Bill of Rights or the concept of it was extended to the internet, it would at least help with that situation. Now, of course, the Bill of Rights in the United States don't apply to everyone in the world, and heck, they don't even apply to everyone in the United States, really. But the concept is good. If we were to have a digital Bill of Rights, who would it be enforced upon? Well, it would be enforced upon any corporation or entity that was violating the concept of free speech, legally protected free speech through their corporate controls and oligarchical power. Who would enforce it? Well, that's a more challenging situation, and there's probably technical ways to address that with domain registrar controls, IANA, things like that. But it probably would need to be a global initiative for it to have effect. Because if you were to create that law and enforce it only in the U.S., then what would happen is the hosts would just move their hosting servers to someplace outside of the CONUS and then do whatever they want there. Sort of like taxes in Ireland, right? You would move your servers to Sealand or whatever, where they didn't, well, Sealand's not a good example. You'd move your servers to Albonia, where they didn't have the digital Bill of Rights, and then boom, game on again. So, challenging question, not fully cooked, But the concept of a Bill of Rights that's allowed, that actually is protecting the citizens of the digital world, which are no different than the citizens of the real world, and then not allowing the corporate oligarchy to dictate the narrative would be what I'd like to see. Digital technical controls could be used, but it would have to be global in nature. Dando Eki. How do you think Dandy Echo? How do you think firearms designs would have evolved if smokeless powder was never invented? You know what? I think we would see things that aren't all that different than we have now, but with much better mitigation of the fouling issues that come with black powder. So, would we have machine guns? We probably have machine guns. They would require some form of extra maintenance, or maybe they'd have some sort of kludgy cleaning system in them that would allow them to continue to function. But I think we would see. I don't think we wouldn't have the same performance we have now, but I think we would have got to similar performance, but in a more kludgy way. I don't think it would have been the end of design or the evolution of even semi-automatic or fully automatic firearms, but they'd have to be thought about quite differently. Blue Jay. I just got a 3rd generation Glock 17 as my first handgun. The primary reason I picked it over other options is because of its aftermarket support, certainly a good reason to go with Glock, customizability, another good reason to go with Glock, and modularity. Aside from an RDS, which I'm already going to get, any suggestions for upgrades? Man, people, like, frankly, you could just use a 3rd gen Glock out of the box and just go with it and not do a damn thing to it and just be fine. Things that come to mind, a red dot's a good thing, not essential. I do think that they're an excellent force multiplier. I don't care for the Glock's plastic sights. I would replace those. And if you were to do anything, maybe a trigger upgrade, maybe. And you got to do that right, because if you do it wrong, you can create an unsafe environment. I know people have to be like, I've done that and never had a problem. I've seen a number of Glocks that people did trigger modifications to and made them bad, if not dangerous. So a properly done trigger would be good. Upgrading the sights to something other than plastic. The plastic, I just don't care for the. There's nothing wrong with plastic. Obviously, we do the What Was Stoner project with polymer monolithic lowers, but there's something about the Glock 17 polymer sights that just don't work for me. I would advise against that. But I would say that the trigger, maybe. Frankly, you don't need to do much or anything to a Glock. Just using it and training with it is more important. Nyrom, thanks for all the great content. Wow, 2 of you in this Q&A saying that. Thank you very much, Nyrom, and thank you for the support. You often said that a modernized lever gun should have more going for it than just optics mounting and front end rails. Any particular you'd like to see? What would constitute a major upgrade for this kind of rifle? Kind of answered this a number of times. I mean, obviously a sighting system is an improvement. I would like to see it retain the 1873 style toggle link system for speed. I think it should be chambered in a probably pistol or high powered pistol caliber type cartridge, like so, for example. Maybe even 5.7 would be interesting, but like 44 Magnum, 357 Magnum seems to be a sweet spot. It would be really cool, although now you're talking rimmed, which would go against this. I think magazine fed would be worthwhile versus a Kingsgate, so you could constantly keep the thing going. Maybe tubular magazines. I don't know. But I think a detachable magazine fed toggle link 1873 style action with optic and chambered in something that keeps the recoil minimal, 357 Magnum or something like that, would be a really interesting gun. Bear Independent. Do you believe we will still have a constitutional representative republic by the end of the decade? I'm not sure we have one now. Daniel C. With 3D printers and print material getting cheaper, have you had any interest in 3D printed firearms components? Oh yeah, absolutely I have interest in that. In fact, the old DEF CON presentation done a zillion years ago now was about that topic, and the idea of leveraging old designs that are now considered very obsolete, like blow forward, might have purpose in a 3D printed environment because you're dealing with really low strength materials. I have not personally played with this. I don't have a 3D printer. I have not gotten into the 3D printing world. I haven't been paying that much attention to what's going on at the moment, but I think we're going to see that be an interesting revolution in many things, firearms included. Jared L. Do you think there would be a market for a reproduction M1 Garand in 223 that is also smaller in size, maybe around the same size as the 276 Trials Garand? What would be a realistic MSRP? Do I think there'd be a market for a 5.56 M1 Garand? Yeah, I do, actually, especially for constrained environments that have ridiculous dumb rules about what define a legal or not legal firearm. So a 10-round N-block clip M1 in 5.56 sounds pretty compelling, and the recoil would be, of course, extremely minimal. So would I want one? Yeah, if someone made a 5.56 M1 with a 10-round N-block clip, I would be one of the consumers for it. However, what is a realistic MSRP? The realistic MSRP is lower than whatever it would cost to make it. I guarantee you that. That is not an easy gun to make and design, even if you're scaling down the original dimensional parts. And it would be expensive, or more expensive than people are willing to pay for it. I would think a realistic MSRP would be $1,000 or less, but the reality is you would not be able to make a gun like that for $1,000 or less. So therefore, it is not viable to make this in the market. John W. At 2GACM, how do the folks with 5.7 caliber pistols tend to do? You know what? They're able to hit stuff. 5.7 is a really easy cartridge to hit things with. Knockdown targets almost always don't go over. Even the pistol plates on the plate rack tend to be iffy. So they tend to hit well, but have a real problem actually neutralizing anything that requires knocking over. Maz, do you find it difficult to keep all the knowledge needed for work, life, etc. in your head? If so, how do you prioritize? Well, part of the thing that's good for this is a lot of the content on the channel are things that I legitimately would do in my life anyway because I care about them. Old West vignettes are a great example of that. Obviously, the guns are too. There's a number of things that are topics that have to be that people ask to be covered on InRange that aren't necessarily something that I'm that personally worried about. Like niche caliber cartridges, ARs, for example, or people get really into very complex and deep dive things about when the screw pitch changed on a Ruger Old Army or something, and that's stuff that I personally don't care about. But I need to know some of it to be able to stay valid and correct on the channel. So I find the best way to balance that is to focus on the things that I personally care about, which I think also makes better content because therefore it comes through in the production of the video. But that's about it. Prioritize, and then the stuff that I need to know that I don't necessarily want to know, make sure that it's there, and I do what I need to do before actually trying to put the content together, if that makes sense. Edwin G. To become a true operator, should I combine tactical reloads with New York reloads? For example, take 5 shots from my FNP90, throw that on the ground, then take out the next target with a SCAR 17, throw that on the ground, and then I would alternate between using grenade launchers and throwing grenade launchers. Wow, you would throw the grenade launcher. That's pretty impressive. First of all, you can't carry all that stuff. That's kind of a video game thing. You're not going to have a P90, a SCAR 17, and then multiple grenade launchers. I don't think, unless you're a particularly huge human being. There is a reality here, though, in that the fastest reload is another gun, generally speaking. So transitioning to your secondary in very close quarters environments is a good idea rather than a speed reload on your AR. So in that regard, is that a New York reload? I guess so. It is a speed. Yes, it's another gun. But I don't know that I would ever practice throwing grenade launchers or trying to carry all of those at once. But you should pursue whatever you think you need to be a true operator. Jeremy the Head Fox. In the past, you've mentioned how the gun culture isn't exactly inclusive. I don't know how I need to mention that. I think it's kind of obvious, to be honest with you, Jeremy. Looking around, it's sadly omnipresent, although getting better. What things would you change to make it a more welcoming space? Well, I'm trying to do that here. That's the whole point of some of this, is that this is a welcoming space. As long as you're not an asshole, you're welcome here. Truthfully. And I think providing that environment and making sure that everyone is treated with respect as best as you can, regardless of differences of opinions, is a way to make a welcoming space. The minute someone comes in that is that kind of asshole or wants to bring bigotry to the environment, you now have the paradox of tolerance, in which tolerating the intolerant provides a space of intolerance. So by not allowing the intolerant to take over this environment or my public events like Desert Brutality, hopefully it's opening the door to be a more inclusive space. And I would think that all of us should strive for that and respect other human beings as long as they respect us, and treat other people like people, just like we'd want to be ourselves. Alexander M. Now that you've had possession of a Springfield Hellcat and the Shield RMSC for over a year and a half, what are your long-term critiques of it and the red dot? I do not have a Shield. The Shield was borrowed for the video, so I have not had a Shield for over a year and a half. That said, I still like the Hellcat. Okay, I understand every time Springfield comes up, there are the obligatory I hate Springfield comments in the comments. Understood. I'm not talking about the company. I'm talking about the gun. The Springfield Hellcat has been a great pistol, continues to be a great pistol. I have not changed the batteries on it, and that dot is still working. So, neat. And I've had great success with it. So, I think both are good guns. I don't think you go wrong with either one of them, and my Hellcat is still going well. Brandon T. Ported barrels versus Compt barrels on EDC guns, everyday carry guns. For those who want the recoil reduction, are the pros and cons of each enough to suggest choosing one over the other? I will tell you that I prefer a Compt barrel in that environment than a ported barrel, because you can uncomp a Compt barrel if you wish. You can take that compensator off and eat it, and you don't have to worry about having that on there. Ported barrel, of course, is immutable. You have a ported gun. Additionally, Compt barrels are at the front of the gun versus a ported barrel, which doesn't make a big difference, generally a couple inches back on the barrel. And if you're doing retention firing, I find that a ported barrel is more unpleasant than a Compt barrel, and you can push out a little bit to get a ported barrel is more unpleasant than a Compt barrel, and you can push a Compt barrel out a little bit to get some of that blast away from your body in retention. So in my opinion, if you're going to have one or the other, I would prefer Compt. Fat Man Tactical. Do you go camping? If so, would you do a video on it? Yes, I do. Actually, quite a bit. Quite a bit more lately than usual. If so, would I do a video on it? Why? I could. Why? I'm a little confused on why anyone would want that. A video of me camping. What is it you'd want to know about me camping? I guess. I mean, it sounds like you'd like it, and I'm not trying to denigrate that. I just trying to understand what people would want to see on a video of me camping. If you all think that that's a cool idea, let me know what you'd want to know about me camping, and I will consider putting something like that together. Norman H. I believe I've seen chest-mounted pistol holsters banned at some events. Is this common, and do you know why? I assume it's a safety issue. You're right. That's exactly what it is. It's a safety issue. Now, is it a real safety issue versus a perceived one? Your mileage may vary, but match rules tend to focus on safety first, not safety third. And chest-mounted pistols, very hard to draw without, essentially covering yourself or part of your body in the purpose of the jaw stroke, which if you get on the trigger too fast means that if you were to accidentally discharge it, there's a very, very good chance you're going to discharge it in a very bad way into yourself. Not saying you can't. I'm not saying that I'm not even saying that type of carry is a problem in the real world, but I'm saying in a time environment where you're a match director, you don't know the skill set of the people in your event, this particular type of carry lends itself to an even worse critical event than some other types of carry. So that's one of the reasons. The other is people draw them tend to sweep people behind them depending on the type of chest rig or shoulder holster thing. And so, for example, drawing like this, you are theoretically sweeping everyone behind you unless you do some sort of dance. So both the chest rig and shoulder holsters are typically not allowed at matches for safety reasons. And part of the reason for that is that if a bad event were to occur, how bad would it be? Jimbo J. With reliable double-action pepper boxes available in the 1830s, why did it take so long for reliable double-action revolvers to become commercially viable? This is a complex question, in that the answer is a little bit challenging. It's not one answer. One is it was difficult to make. To fit the double-action functionality in a revolver back then meant very small, tiny parts compared to the pepper box, which is really large, simple, crude parts. Which meant it was more reliable. The little tiny simple parts would tend to fracture and break. You do see, of course, the Star DA revolver during the Civil War, which did exactly that, broke a lot. And they switched the Star from DA to SA to mitigate that issue. Additionally, Colt, as in Samuel Colt, didn't think much of the concept either. He didn't think it was a necessary thing, and it was a liability. So if you combine small parts breakage, the STARS issue during the war, and Colt being like, meh, that's kind of where we're at. Jeff K. Is there a way to police the firearms training industry to prevent incompetent trainers? We had a professional firearms tactic instructor come to a USPSA match and shoot at a 30% level. Well, I would say that matches are only one indication. This is one of the things that people get confused about. Obviously, you'd want your firearms trainer to be better than the 30% level. You'd want them to be competent on the clock. But firearms training can be a number of things: safety, manipulation, handling, none of which necessarily represent speed on the clock. And if those are done right, that's still a competent firearms trainer, depending on your goals. Could also be tactics. Maybe someone teaches you group tactics, individual tactics, how to de-escalate a firefight, how to get out of a de-escalate a conflict, how to avoid a firefight. Those are all competent things as well that won't necessarily represent themselves on the clock. If you're looking at from the perspective of a firearms trainer making you a better shooter, then absolutely you'd want to see them perform well on the clock. And I think the only way to do that would be have to only go to ones that are willing to put their name and ego on the line with their scores, which, if you look, is a startlingly small number. Ryan, being a native Californian, I have heard for years that the only reason the M14 is worse than the AR-15 is due to lack of support and development by the U.S. military over the years. Do you think the deficiencies with the Mini are due to lack of development or a simply subpar design? Well, lack of development plays. I mean, the AR-15 is America's little darling, and therefore every part and possible widget and thingamajig that could be made for an AR-15 has been done. Maybe more. I'm sure there's more to come. But the Mini 14 is really a downscaled M1 Garand, and the M1 Garand was a fantastic semi-automatic rifle during World War II and still continued to be in Korea, and even still is today, but it is obsolescent. It is not obsolete. Obsolescent. So you scale that down, which was never designed with the concept of being anything other than wood and steel, and not modular. Didn't have the concept of modern sighting systems involved in the design, and you have a gun that is essentially obsolescent based on the design that it came from, which is now obsolescent. So the Mini 14 is still a functionally fine rifle. I don't disagree with you on that. But if you want it to do all things in a more modern role, it is not the right platform for that. And that's because it's based on a gun that's based from 1930s and hasn't really changed and wasn't designed with those principles and concepts in mind. Daniel S. Third time asking. Third time. Any chance of a comparison of oddball calibers against standard calibers on the spinner? Like 9mm versus 7.62x25, 357 SIG versus 32 ACP versus 7.5 FK. Probably someday. I'll get there, maybe. It's not something that's super duper on my list of to-dos, but people probably will get there at some point, yes. James B. Do you ever feel like taking a day or weekend to disconnect from the world and do some Luddite LARPing? I don't know about the LARPing part, but I definitely feel like taking lots of time to disconnect from the world, and living where I do that as much as possible. Michael, long-time viewer, first-time questioner. Well, thank you for adding a question here, Michael. Do you have any interest, or have you ever considered doing content related to belated melee weapons, particularly in regards to their use and disadvantage compared to firearms for defensive use? A collab we did with the Great War Project talked on that and touched on that topic. But being that I'm not someone that puts a lot of effort into knife fighting skills or melee weapon skills, I do not think that I'm in the right place to be able to provide appropriate information on that, and therefore should leave that to others who have put their emphasis there. As a result, will I be doing that? Probably not a lot of that. That said, there are the project, if you haven't seen it here on InRange, On Her Own, with my friend Annette Evans, is tackling a number of those topics, and we'll be tackling more of them. Recently did we did stun guns, and we did this ridiculous fist item, and specifically targeting women, but the same ideas apply. I will tell you that from ECQ, and by the way, more to come with On Her Own, which is, I think, a really exciting project here on InRange. Really happy with that. I will tell you that one thing I can tell you about when it comes to knives and melee items for defensive use was something that you learn really quickly at ShivWorks ECQC course, in that if you are one of those people that carries a bunch of knives on you, or a easily accessible knife, an easily accessible knife is easily accessible to someone who wants to use your knife on you, especially in a melee situation or a tumble. So if you're going to carry a knife, consider the fact that you may not be the first one to get to it when you are surprised in an assault. John K. It is 1945 and you have to pick a service handgun, and the high power is sadly unavailable. Where do you go next? 1911. I know I said this earlier, kind of, but I'm not a huge 1911 fan. But in 1945, if you can't have a high power, I don't know why you wouldn't go with the 1911. There's others out there, but yeah, the P38's good, although the 1911's less fragile in that regard. P38 will be fine. 1911's fine. I wouldn't go with the Luger at that point. It's just, it requires 3 hands to clear a malfunction, and that's a problem. Yeah, 1911 or P38. Andrew, does there exist an InRange video that you have shot and fully edited but never posted? Yes. Audio issues that I was never able to mitigate, and just gave up on it. Duke von Meep II. Do you think the concept of an offensive handgun, like the Mark 23, could make a comeback given modern technology and optics? Yeah, I do. And in fact, the video I did recently about the FK Burno PSD in 7.5, I think is an offensive handgun, and I think we're seeing a number of those coming to the market. I think we're going to see more of them like that come to the market, and the FK Burno is an example of that. Jesse James. As of yesterday, if you've been vaxxed, you no longer need to wear a mask inside or outside nationwide. I'm assuming you're referring to the CDC declaration. How are you going to enforce this rule at your matches without crossing the line on people's rights to go unvaxxed if they so choose, and not checking their papers to enforce the no mask rule? Well, I have removed the mask requirement at my events. I believe that if you feel you have a need to wear one, you should continue to wear one. If you are immunocompromised at an event, you should wear one. If you have not been vaccinated, I would request that you wear one, but I'm not going to ask people for vaccination papers, if that's what you're thinking. This is an instance in which I hope that my environment and my community will be trustworthy and decent human beings and do the right thing. And if you are fully vaccinated, of course, at this point, the risk to you is not gone, but greatly mitigated. So as more and more people become fully vaccinated, the few that do not get vaccinated present a number of challenges, one of which is they could be a carrier. Another is that they will be ultimately the incubators that create new strains of the COVID virus that could bypass vaccination protections. But that is a risk we just have to take. Now, I've long known that in our outdoor environment, the risk was relatively low compared to other environments such as closed indoor spaces as a restaurant. So at an outdoor match, the need to wear the mask is less than inside of a restaurant or inside of a house. But in the beginning of this, when we were not clear and did not have clear scientific information, which, by the way, that's how science works. Science works by probably taking the worst case scenario and then trying to figure out what the reality is. And we've learned over the last year plus of the pandemic of what the worst case scenarios are and what environments are and what the transmission methods are. Like, we learned that surface contact wasn't a problem, but didn't know that at the beginning. You adjust your policies and your procedures and your actions based on the best scientific understanding at the moment. And at the moment, with a lot of people vaccinated and outdoor environment understanding of transmission risk, with the current strains that we're currently facing at the moment, I would ask that people who are not vaccinated to wear a mask if they are going to attend the event. And I would ask people that are vaccinated, that are still concerned, to do what's right for them, but I will not require them at the event. Les Winner. I'm reading Les's last name because we know Les and he's been on the channel before. He's Polaris Logistics is a company. He helps us with getting guns to Finland. So if you need to move a gun around the world, Polaris is the one, and Les Winner is a great guy. It has been mentioned several times that the AKM is the standard used for the rifle portion of a 2G ACM brutality match in 1911 for a pistol. What would you say would be the minimum for a DMR? Well, we haven't done a DMR-based match with two-gun or brutality, but that's in the works. I would say the minimum for that would be an optically sighted bolt-action rifle, or that would be the real minimum. The best minimum would probably be the SVD. Like, now, not everyone has an SVD. I totally understand that. But if you look at what the SVD is, a 3-minute of angle gun with a 4X optic that's 10-round box magazine fed, that seems like a minimum to me. Carl V. Carl, you and Ian did a review of the Keltec RDB and liked it at the time. Hasn't been mentioned since. Do you still think it is a good pull-pup rifle, or do you consider it also ran now? If also ran, what changed your mind? Well, I haven't had any experience with the Keltec RDB since we did the review. After we did that review, this is a long time ago when it was still acceptable to do this, we did a viewer-supporter giveaway and shipped it to an FFL, to a lucky winner, and haven't had the RDB in our possession since. I do think that bullpups have come to the market since then that make the RDB less desirable, predominantly the MDR. Do I think it's an also-ran? No. The problem with Keltec is quality control and production numbers. Michael M. Wisconsin recently designated May 14th as Hmong Lao Veterans Day. As a resident of central Wisconsin and grandson of a Vietnam veteran, I want to know more about the Hmong Lao veterans than the blanket statement of they fought on our side in the Vietnam War and were forced to leave. What advice do you have for someone trying to learn about the events that were intentionally hidden for decades? That's an interesting question. It's harder to do than you'd think. Part of that would be to be able to talk to some Hmong people themselves that may actually have first-person accounts. I'm old enough that when I was in high school, some of the people that I was in high school with had literally, we were kids at the time, of course, but I remember some of them had stories, personal stories, about their life in Vietnam during the war, or at the end of the war, or even or their parents did for sure, as well as I remember one very specifically talking about with his family as a very small child, crossing through the killing fields of Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge. So there is first direct source, right? First person. Primary source. That would be one, talking to Hmong people, if you have any Hmong friends. In terms of finding information about that, that's a challenge. I don't know. Reach out maybe to, since Wisconsin designated this, why don't you reach out and say, hey, cool, you set up a day. Neat. That's neat. So what do we do with that day? Asking them if they designated that day as Hmong Lao Veterans Day, why not reach out to your legislature and be like, all right, you designated the day. How do we celebrate this day? Celebrate. And what are resources we can do to ensure that we actually learn as much as we can about Hmong Lao veterans? That's my first thought. Of course, books. I don't have a better answer than that, sadly. Here's an answer from one of the other supporters, Katie Campbell. Wisconsin PBS did a documentary about the Hmong about 20 years ago. I know there's some other stuff earlier from YouTube as well. I found stuff a year ago when I was doing research on another project for the Airborne Corps. I didn't make detailed notes, but they weren't the focus of the project, so I can't give you specific links. Yeah, you never know what's hiding on YouTube. So why don't you search for Hmong on that as well and see what you find. Fascinating. And his answer also is you should contact the people who made the look for the legislative history of the bill and contact the folks behind it, which was my answer as well. So we're on the same page. That sounds like the right answer. Owen, manyth time asking, do you have any thoughts about the Zapistas? Would you consider doing a video on their war with Mexico? I do have thoughts about the Zapistas, as well as the Villistas, and a lot of things that have gone on in Mexico in regards to their wars and their revolutions, etc. Would I ever consider doing a video on that? Yes, and I've had some thoughts about videos I want to do about the Mexican-American War too, although that's not Zapistas, obviously. Maybe someday. I'd like to do videos on site, or at least go to locations where I can get direct, tactile idea of what it looks like to be in a place, space, and time before I do stuff, but that may not be entirely viable with a video about the Zapistas, for example. But it is something I would consider doing, yes. Prolapse cranium. Whoa! I'm sorry to hear about that. Prolapse cranium. I hope it gets better. If the U.S. Army adopted lever guns, could you see the World War I U.S. Army using Winchester 1895s or something similar, and would that outcome delay the development of the Garand? No, it would not have. While I still think the lever guns provide things that bolt guns do not, they still are completely obsolete when you put them up against a semi-automatic. They're better than a bolt gun in many ways, but when you take a semi-automatic out, like an M1, it smokes it. So no, it would not have delayed that. Eddie, second time asking, what is your opinion on AR-style rifles and unusual calibers like 45-70, 30-06, 300 Win Mag? Any practical use or just a range toy? This happens all the time. Every time there's almost every time there's content about the AR or even the What Would Stoner Do project, people will be like, "What about cartridge X, Y, or Z?" And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. If it's something you want to do, have at it. It's your gun. If you want to hunt with your AR and you want to chamber it in something bizarre like that, I think that's pushing the platform in a weird direction. I guess you could do 458 SOCOM or something like that. Do it what you wish, and maybe you have a niche application for a niche gun in a unusual cartridge. So if you want to buffalo hunt with your AR, you probably want something like 458 SOCOM. I think the AR is just dandy in 5.56, and I don't see any reason to mess with that. So I'm not a big fan of unusual cartridge chamberings in ARs. And this comes up all the time, and it's in the I don't really care category. Dick Burglar. Whoa. Any chance we'll get some 10mm action in the FK Burno? Yes. I will eventually do some 10mm work with that as well. The video on the channel so far has completely represented the gun in the FK75 cartridge, which is their proprietary cartridge. But the gun can be converted to 10mm, and you'll absolutely see a video with 10mm FK Burno action. Don't know when. Robert E. If I prefer the manual of arms, ergonomics, style, and practice with modern double-action revolvers and lever-action PCCs over semi-autos, does that justify using the former for self or home defense, or should I get with the times and learn to love semi-autos like Glocks and ARs? I live in a 2A friendly state and already own options in all the aforementioned categories. Robert, everyone likes to put out the idea that, like, this always gets misconstrued too. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a 30-round magazine or a D60 for your home defense. In fact, that's fine. If you think that that's what suits you and you need it, have at it. The reality is, statistically speaking, you don't need that. Now, statistics are funny in that there's outliers. So, if you want to plan for the outlier and realize you've got the middle ground covered, have at it. But I would say that you are better off with something that you intimately understand and are familiar with and know how to run and mitigate malfunctions should one occur than you are just going, I need a semi-auto for home defense. Because reality is, a double-action revolver or a lever-action PCC or semi-automatic, or a lever-action for that matter, of any sort, if you're very familiar with it and know what you're doing with it and are competent, is completely viable for almost any home defense scenario. But me saying that doesn't mean you should be limited to that. It's a personal option. But if you have more practice with those guns and prefer them, are you limiting yourself? Yes. But are you also putting an emphasis on where your skills are? Yes. And I would say that that's better in a high-stress environment than just going that thing because it's more modern. Aaron H. Any thoughts or comments on the Colonial pipeline ransomware hack? Oh, yeah. Way more of that's coming. And our basic fundamental infrastructure in this country, and other countries too, actually, are completely insecure nightmares. And that ransomware hack of the Colonial pipeline is just a visible example of way worse things to come. Nothing's been done to mitigate these risks. Everything is done as a cost-benefit analysis. The risk is misunderstood and underappreciated, and we will see someday worse things like full grid failure. I guarantee it. Stanislaw, in your recent black powder content, you regularly cautioned against loading directly from a powder flask. During the time period in which these devices were in standard use, was your advice a standard practice, or were people redistributing phalanges and metacarpals? Here's the deal. Back in the day, people loaded directly from the powder flask. The truth is, I frequently load from a handheld flask. But modern safety sensibilities indicate you should pour into a separate container, then that container should go into the muzzle. Is not loading from the flask a more safe procedure? Absolutely. If I'm making a video recommending what you should do, I'm telling you, do not load from the flask. Don't ever load from the flask. Do I load from the flask? Frequently. Lily, second time asking. In discussions with others of my desire to get medical training, I've heard opinions of constricting bands being superior or advantageous over the use of a tourniquet. What are your thoughts on this sentiment? Okay, now you're going to ask my thoughts. I'm not a medical professional, and it's possible that I'm wrong here. But my training tells me this. I do not agree with constricting bands. I believe a properly designed tourniquet like a cat or others of that, or a soft T, can be used perfectly well to do what a tourniquet is designed to do, while simultaneously not causing damage to the person receiving the medical aid. So when you apply a tourniquet and applies pressure over a larger surface area, is it harder to theoretically cut off the blood flow? Yes. However, does it do less damage to the neurological environment and other tissues that it is being tensioned against? Yes, because it's distributing the pressure over a broader surface area. Constricting bands could be used to stop the blood flow and save, obviously, and if that's all you got, saving a life. But a constricting band is much more likely to cause actual physiological damage in its application to a properly designed tourniquet. So in my opinion, since you're asking my thoughts are I stay away from constricting bands and I go with properly designed tourniquets like the Soft T and the Cat. Robin V. Have you ever used an optical sight that was so bad you would have preferred to use V-notch iron sights? Yes. I have a Remington rolling block that has a Reproduction old-timey 1870s scope on it, and that scope is in every way worse than iron sights, in every possible way. Martin M. Scopes on lever actions. What do you think? Okay. What are you doing with it? Are you hunting? Do you want a scope? Is it a design? I don't think they lend themselves well to scopes because of the design of the general receiver, etc. But if you want a scope on your lever action, I don't think it's wrong. Colin H. Were there any sort of speed loaders or other devices to assist with reloading cartridge pistols in the Old West? When I answer this question as no, there's inevitably going to be examples of yes. So there must be and there must have been. But I'm going to answer this question of were they in common use? And the answer to that was no. There were speed loaders and things like that were not in common use in the Old West, even though there are inevitably some weirdo, neato examples of some design that someone came up with. Almost all carrying of cartridges for reloading in the Old West came either from a pocket, a pouch, or a belt, cartridge belt, or a bandolier. So I am not aware of any speed loaders, with the exception, here's one more prominent one, let me get this. The Spencer carbine with its Blakesley tubes was a speed reloader, right? You would open up the butt, pour it in, close it. But even that wasn't heavily used. But that was, you know what? That's not a pistol. So nix that. I am not aware of any speed loading devices for pistols, and if they existed, they were not in common use. Tim O.G. For everyday carry, would you rather have a single action but double stack pistol or a double action but single stack pistol? I'm going to go with capacity with single action but double stack pistol. Paul J. Have you ever walked out of a film, play, exhibition, or concert, and if so, why? Yep, I have. I was a kid. I was a kid. 20s. I don't remember what year it was. I went to go see Metallica at some huge venue, and they sucked. It was terrible. Concert sucked. We were like 5 miles up in the sky. You could barely see these dots on a stage. The whole thing was unentertaining and dumb, and I left. So Metallica concert was one of the most boring, lame concerts I ever went to. And so I did something else. Oscar, do you plan to mud test the SLT trigger and Recluse fire control group in comparison with a mil-spec FCG? Well, we've already done mud tests on standard mil-spec ARs, so that's been done. Will there be a mud test on the SLT and Recluse triggers and the What Would Thunder Do project at some point? Yes, there will be. Nick H., have you heard of the Cerro Gordo Ghost Town rebuilding project? It seems like an interesting topic for the Old West. I've not just heard of it, I'm a fan of it. So Old West Living is a channel on YouTube, and let me shout out to that channel, and Brent Underwood over there. I watch your channel and love your work, and I'm really happy to watch your videos and watch you progress in terms of your efforts to rebuild Cerro Gordo and make it a viable place once again. And I also really love your content in terms of how living in that place has changed him from when he moved there over a year ago to now as a human being. I believe Brant moved from Austin, Texas to Cerro Gordo with the idea of renovating Cerro Gordo into a Airbnb type of thing, some sort of a resort, and has learned so much and has also embraced the history of Cerro Gordo, this ghost town, and is currently working to make it a viable place, and has lived there now for over a year and going from the city of Austin to living almost entirely by himself in this very historic, remote, survive or don't survive environment has changed him as a person. And his video project, which is called Ghost Town Living, I believe, Brent Underwood, is absolutely phenomenal and wonderful. Love it. Love his work. Love what's going on there. I would like to go do a video there at Cerro Gordo, and I think hopefully someday I'll be able to communicate with him and make that happen. As for Cerro Gordo, for you, those of you that don't know, it's a ghost town up in the mountains, in eastern mountains of California, that was incredibly important. The silver producer for California, and pretty much helped create and build Los Angeles, but in itself became a ghost in the long run. And it's a wild, woolly place with a crazy story, and still is to this day. So check that out. Cerro Gordo is amazing. Got a little something in my eye there. Ryan S. Winter/mud triggers or movable trigger guards. Do you have a preference, and why so? Nope. Don't really want to move my trigger guard. I guess I do have a preference. If I'm going to have a trigger guard that's designed to be winter or mud viable, it's also glove viable. So I just prefer it to be larger right off the bat rather than have to move it out of the way. So yes, my preference is to just have a larger trigger guard that affords gloves and is also viable for that. Rumble strip. Given that 99% of the people, 99% of the time who have an LPVO run it at either minimum or maximum magnification, wouldn't something like what LCAN does make more sense? Smaller footprint, easier to have better class clarity at the high end of magnification. That is kind of true. Even at matches, people tend to be at 1x and then vip to 6 or vip to 8. Although they will sometimes set it to 4, 5, or 6 or something that's intermediary depending on if they know the stage design. So it's not true that 99% of the time it's either one or the other. The problem with all of these 1/4s or 1/8s, like the LCAN, is that they've been poorly done. The LCAN looks cool, but its zeroing and mounting mechanism sucks. And I don't know that they are that far less in weight and cost. They're actually rather complex. I do have a weird Russian optic that I'm going to look at on the channel at some point, which might address both. I don't know. It is weird and Russian, so who knows. But is the idea of a 1 or an 8 a good idea? Yes. Has a 1 or an 8 been executed in a way that makes sense in a market where LPVOs are fantastic? No. William F. I noticed some of your... Oh, the sun's catching up on me. Look at... Here it comes. William F. I noticed some of your older content, such as your review of the Masterpiece Arms MPAR 556, isn't available anywhere. Is there a reason? Yes. InRange, right off the bat, started with the idea of we don't necessarily want to be beholden to YouTube, and the first year of InRange was 100% proprietarily hosted on Full30, with the idea of we will get people to come to this alternative hosting venue and not deal with YouTube. Can't do it. Not on YouTube means you don't exist. So a year into the project, we ended up starting to publish on YouTube as well as Full30. I felt that Full30 would still be an archive of that first year of work, and Full30 has technically shit the bed and lost much of that content. It's also in 480, not 1080p. I have a lot of it on archive, but if I were to republish it to YouTube, people would be like, this is low quality. So I have it and haven't republished it. Tell me your thoughts. I'm on B. If you were choosing a carry gun in 1860, would you go with a Colt Army, Navy, or Pocket model, or would you choose something else? I would not choose any of those if it was 1860 and I had the choice to pick whatever I want. I would actually not go with well, depending on size. When you say pocket model or Colt Army, these are very different things. If I'm going for something that's small, the Colt pocket, the 1860. I was gonna say the 1862, or 61, or that doesn't. Anyways, I would go with the Star single action. I have videos coming out about that at some point, and the Star is incredibly reliable for what it is. Isn't really much bigger than a Colt Army, and provides reliability that the Colt doesn't. Although the Colt's excellent. So, if I were choosing a carry gun in 1860, it'd be the Star single action. Bill B. I love the K&M Arms M17S and 308, and I'm wondering if or when you'll be doing a review. Don't know. Depends on when I get a hold of one. Never had a hold of one, never shot one, haven't seen any in the wild. Someday maybe if I get a hold of one. I don't have possession of one, not interested in it at the moment. I've got a backlog of things to work on, but someday if I can easily access a K&M Arms M17S, perhaps I will do a review. And last question, Patrick H, before the sun gets to me. Carl, what models of Italian reproduction revolver should a beginner to cowboy action shooting be looking for or considering? Well, if you're going to start in cowboy action shooting, and you want to go with something historic, so you're looking at an Italian reproduction, you want to go Cartridge. You don't want to go with like Frontiersman with cap and ball. That's a whole nother problem. Personally, I would recommend for a beginner, now it depends on your historicity requirements. A beginner, a Colt single action Army from Uberti, that could be any of the importers, Cimarron or Taylor's or whatever, in 38 Special. 38 Special is an easily accessible cartridge, low recoil, easy to reload, and low cost to fire. Of course, not historical because they didn't make the gun in 38 Special. If you really want to be a little more fancy and still go with a cartridge gun in 38 Special, you could also look at the Reproduction 1871 Colt open tops, and they also make those in 38 Special. So I would look at either an open top or a single action Army in 38 Special by Uberti, imported by Cimarron or Taylor's, either one. So if you want history, go 45 Colt. Still easier to reload and acquire components than 4440. And 4440 has benefits to black powder, but you're probably not going to start off in black powder as a beginner. And you could still load your single action Army or open top in 38 Special in black powder if you ever decide to shoot in a black powder division or category. So I would look for a Colt single action Army or open top chambered in 38 Special, 357, 38 Special, and then use 38 Specials in the match. That's my thoughts. If you want history, go 45 Colt. That's it. That's the last question. All these provided by Patreon supporters and just in time to escape the sun. We're getting here a little over an hour. I want to thank all of you for keeping InRange alive. It's truly you, the viewer, that keep this channel alive. We really deleted the AdSense account years ago, 4.5 years ago. Received no money from anyone except you, the viewer, via Patreon to keep this channel alive. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for investing in this and believing in the content that we're creating here to make it worth your while. And thank you for being here to be a viewer. If you can't support us because times are tough or it's just not your thing, the other things you can do to help out InRange is you can subscribe to the channel, and even more importantly, leave a comment and share with your friends, because the algorithm absolutely is not working in our favor. Thanks for watching.